Hi, welcome to Mr. Otter Studio. Today we are going to be drawing and painting a red poppy using watercolors. This is a great tutorial if you are beginning. I'll show you how to draw the poppy and also how to paint it in. And this is great also if you've been painting for a while but you just needed a little inspiration. The way that we paint the petals in also will be helpful if you want to learn how to paint draped fabric or clothing. So there's a few different things you're going to learn in this tutorial along with how to draw a poppy. We will be painting light to dark using watercolors. Some of you might be beginning watercolors and one of the problems is you can't erase. But if you paint light to dark, it gives you time to build up to those final dark details. So if things are kind of need to be moved around a little bit, if you paint light to dark, it gives you a little bit of time to make some of those changes. And of course, you can do this any way you want. This is just the way that I do it. These are the supplies that you need. You need some watercolor paper. You need some paints. I'm just using a simple 8-color set. You need a paintbrush. These are the two brushes we're going to use to paint everything in. You need a flat brush and a round brush. The flat brush is just for painting in our background. The round brush we'll paint most of it with. You need water, a paper towel, a scratch piece of paper to test things out on, pencil and eraser, and I like to use masking tape just to tape my borders, but this is totally optional. I just like how it makes it look a little bit more finished. If you're going to use tape for your border, go ahead and tape it down now. Smooth out the edges. I'm going to be drawing dark so that you can see my lines, but draw really lightly so you don't need to do a lot of erasing. All right, the first thing we're going to do is draw an oval in this middle space. Let's call it an egg, why not? And then let's go ahead and draw another circle, and it's going to be closer to the bottom. Now we're going to separate these into kind of the areas where we have petals. So there's going to be one here, and we're just going to draw a line up to indicate this petal. There is one down here, and these petals will cross over the center. Draw another circle in the center of this shape. Then there is another petal that's almost going straight up into the center here. This big petal just comes down at an angle into the center. And there's a big one that runs around back here and comes in. But what's in between here is a petal that's overlapping. So I'm just going to draw a line that's coming a little bit in like this. And then draw lines back into the center from that. So we have 6 petals. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. This big long one is 5, and then 6. Now let's make these petals actually look like poppy petals, and we're going to do that with the edges. So I like to think of them almost like the bottom of a twirling dress or a piece of fabric that's curving and bending, and there's a better word. I just can't think of it, but there definitely is another word for that. How you draw these edges really is up to you. I would just try not to make it look like, these are mountains like that. The same. Give them a little variety. Some bend in, some go out. As it curves around, these get a little bit further away from each other. And then right here, I'm going to show you a little trick. We're going to draw a triangle in here. This is just where this petal bends out and then it came back in. And then let's just move in this direction and let's start with this petal. So it's tucked behind this petal, so I'm going to start down just a little bit. And sometimes you might notice some petals that actually have like a cut, like a V in them. It's coming in and again getting wider as it comes in towards the center. And we'll start with this one behind it. And this one isn't as dramatic. It doesn't have a lot of those same curves that the other ones did. Bends in a little bit and comes up behind this petal. Let's go ahead and draw this one in. So we're going to start in the center and just come out and then start creating those waves. And the cool part with this flower is when it goes past this petal right here, we can see the bottom of it. So I'm just going to thicken up these a little bit, some of these lines. Now let's start on the petal that's behind it. I actually drew it a little bit too dramatic, so it actually probably comes right up about here. And then just dips back in once we get to the second line of this petal. And this petal starts in towards this one right here. So this one's tucked behind. So we're going to just come right out and curve over, curve up, and then create those nice edges. If yours looks a little bit different, that's great. Let's go ahead and draw the stem in, curving back and curving back. All right, we're a little bit closer now. We're going to draw some of the details in the center part. What you want to do is just create a little bit of texture around it, because where this turns lighter, it's folding with these petals. And then on the top of this, there's this really cool star shape. So make a little dot towards the top, and then you're going to draw a line straight down, 2 on the side, and then a line straight up, and then 2 on the side of that. So it's almost like we've drawn an X with a line through the middle of it. And then thicken up those lines, and then it's pretty dark underneath and green. These next pieces, if you're just beginning, you might want to just leave them out. To simplify, I'm not going to draw all of them, I'm just going to draw some of them, and I'm only going to overlap the border in a few parts. So we're going to be drawing these oval shapes of these, I don't know, stamen, maybe? Draw this part really lightly. There are some in here, but as they get into the shape, they're moving up a little bit. After you draw some in there, you're gonna want to attach it back to the center, almost like this is the sun. So we want everything to come back into the middle, and we're attaching them with 2 lines to show that there is a thickness there. Go ahead and erase any lines that you don't need anymore. All right, now let's get ready to paint this in. We are going to paint a light yellow background. And to do that, we're going to create a puddle in our tray. If you don't have a tray with your watercolor set, you can just use a white plate. That works great. Just create a puddle with your paintbrush. We're covering a pretty big area, so we want to make sure we have enough paint so that we don't need to remix our colors. Drop some yellow in there. Again, it's going to be really light yellow. So I'll paint it on my paper. You can kind of see how light that is. So this puddle is big enough that it should cover this whole area without remixing. I want to get a nice even color. So one tip is I'm going to start in one area and move across my paper. So I'm right-handed, so I'm starting on the left. If you're left-handed, you want to start on the right. And I just overlap my lines slightly. I want to make sure I don't get any stripes in here, so you might want to paint in your flower using brush strokes like that instead of the lines that I use in the background. Just cover everything. Let it dry and we will do the next step. You'll know when it's dry if it's not shiny anymore. All right, the inside of mine is definitely dry. Just grab some of that really saturated yellow, and we're going to paint in some of these we'll pretend I know how to say that. Let's just call them these little egg shapes. And there is a little bit of green when we're working in this center area. Add a little green to your yellow puddle. And we're just gonna bring a little bit of that color on some of these. And then go ahead and just grab a green, yellow color, and you can paint in this shape. The petals seem pretty dry, so I'm going to start painting them. Be careful if these areas are wet, these yellow parts we just painted in, because if you paint this next color near it and it is wet, the colors will bleed together. And if that happens, it's okay. Like, it looks nice and painterly, so don't worry too much about it. I'm gonna clean out that center tray with my paper towel, and I'm gonna make a big puddle of red orange. So we are painting light to dark. So this is going to be the lighter color that I see on the petals. And there are a few spots that are even lighter than this color. So I'll show you how to kind of create that feel. Okay, so grab some red, drop it in your puddle, and grab a little yellow or orange and create a nice red orange color. Here is the color that I'm going to be using. And we are going to paint petal to petal. So let's go ahead and start on this first one. And first I'm just gonna come up and along the edge. If you have a really light background, you wanna definitely keep this inside the border. And I'm trying to work while these are still wet so I can get a nice flat color in there. Now as I move towards the center, I'm gonna be careful to try to paint around these little round, I really should learn the name of them, things. Now I'm going to rinse my brush off, blot it off on my paper towel, and I'm going to just bring some of these highlights out. So there's 3 of them I see in here. Do the same thing, rinse my brush off, blot it off, and there's a highlight on half of this petal. There is a highlight in here. So to take the paint off, you have to be careful, but if you blot your brush off, dry it off really well, you can soak up some of the paint. And I'm not going over it a few times. I'm trying just to go over once, and that's it. So now let's work on this petal that's behind it. So get your brush, soak up some of that paint again. Go around the border first. Work fast and make sure that your paintbrush is loaded with paint. Rinse off your brush, blot it off on your paper towel, and then we're just going to soak up a few highlights. Now let's go ahead and work on this bottom one. Same thing, load up your brush with paint, cover the whole petal, bring it back in, rinse off your brush, blot it off on your paper towel, and do the same thing we did on the other one. Instead of painting this one in, I'm gonna move up to this top really big petal. Now, hopefully, if you're just starting to paint, you can see the value of having these petals already mixed up. So let's go ahead and start on the outside edge. And my paint's loaded up, you can see that huge puddle that I'm leaving. And that is so I can blend it. You know, when I come back, I have some wet paint to work with. If it's dry, it's just not going to blend as well. Rinse off your brush, dry it off, and then come back in. This one has some highlights in the center. So I'm just lifting up the paint a little bit in there and then up on some of these petals. Now let's move to this back petal right here. Again, just paint it all in. Use your paper towel, dry off your brush, bring some of those highlights in. Now let's work on this bottom petal. So we're gonna do the same thing where we just fill it in. Rinse off your brush, add any of those areas where there are highlights. This is called lifting off the paint. So I'm just taking a dry brush and just lifting off some of the darker colors. All right, as we let that layer dry, we're just gonna work a little bit more in the center area and get just some of these darker shadows. So I'm gonna just create a yellowy green. And then what I'm going to do to make it a little bit darker is actually add a little bit of red to it. And it almost turns it into a brown. And this is going to be the shadow that these different shapes are making in this light area. I don't want my brush to have too much paint on it, so I'm just blotting it off a little bit on my paper towel. Almost dark, it's darker than that yellow that's on them. And then we're just going to indicate these shadows. The darkest part of the shadow is on this side. As long as we get some of the shadows in there and then add a little bit of water. So it's just a little bit lighter and you can add some shadows on this side. And since we're in here, we might as well finish up the green. I'm gonna put it right in that same puddle with a little bit of red to make it darker. And let's go ahead and just paint in that middle area. Just fill in some of these little triangles that are on the top. And then I'm just blotting off my brush and I'm gonna bring a highlight into this side. Now, while we let that area dry, let's work on the petals again. So we thought this was dark, but we definitely wanna get it darker. Add a little bit more red to your petal and a little bit more yellow. Come back in and we are going to add some of these shadows. So there is a big shadow underneath this petal right here. So anywhere now that I see any of these shadows, just in the middle of it, anywhere I see any of these curves, we can go ahead and put that in. On this one, I'll show you how to make your lines a little bit softer. So you just rinse your brush off, dry it off on your paper towel, and then just come next to it and you can soften it up. We're going to take that same color. These petals right here have a ton of shadows on them. And you can bring some smaller lines going in. Then if you want to smooth out any of those lines, rinse your brush off, blot it off, and then you can come along those edges and you can smooth them out if you want. If you want a smoother transition from light to dark, you can do it that way. Now let's work with this petal right here. It's all really dark in this area. Just make sure you don't paint over that little piece that's bending over. And this comes all the way down into the center and around our little yellow shapes that we made. So as you can see, we're working in layers, we're adding a little bit, we're taking a little bit away. Now you can take that same color and add any other wrinkles in the shapes that you would like. And you can fan your brush out and add some texture in there if you want to do it that way as well. Now I'm dipping straight into the red, but I'm just going to come right over some of my shadows. So you can grab that bright red, you can add some green to it if you want. You could just grab orange as well to put in some of these darker, brighter areas. So we're working in layers. Smooth out any of your edges that you feel like need to be just a little bit smoother. Add some of those shadows back in if you lost them. So to add a little bit more color to the petals, we already have some reds, we have some oranges. Make another puddle of orange in your tray. So just use red and yellow or red and orange. Fan your brush out and then just go over some of those areas, just creating that texture. You don't have to do it across the whole petal, but just anywhere you feel like needs that texture. This is the fun part where you get to add details. You can add some more shadows inside of this part. I just like to get my yellows a little bit brighter. They seemed bright when I put them in there, but I'm just gonna go over some of my yellow shapes, trying not to bleed it into the background. This part, it's really like hard to know when to stop because once you start layering, it's just really hard sometimes, at least for me, to just put that paintbrush down. All right, now let's paint the stem. Create a green. You can use blue and yellow. You can just use the green in your tray. I like to use a little red just to kind of make it not so bright. Paint your stem in. And you can do the lifting off technique in your stem where you rinse your brush off, dry it off, and then just go along the edge. It'll just create a highlight. There's definitely one along the back. It's just smaller. And now you get to decide what color you want to paint your background. You could just leave it as is. You could paint it black. You could paint it blue. You could paint it green. That's actually what color it is in my photograph. I'm just going to do dark green. If you want to follow along with me to do the dark green, you can. Whichever color you choose to use. You can of course use whatever color you want for the background. However, I'll just give you this tip. Make sure you mix up a lot of it because we're covering a really large area with it. If you look at the photograph, the flower is in focus and then the background is kind of blurry. That can create depth in your paintings. It creates depth in your photographs for sure. I'm going to show you how to do it in this painting. So we're going to paint it a dark green and then I'll show you how to add some of these other parts to it. Since we are doing it this way, we're going to have to paint fast. Mix up a green, add a little bit of red to it, and it'll look really dark until you paint it. Like that's not very dark. So we need more color, more green. And then what I'm going to do is make another petal here of a little bit of a lighter green. So I'm still going to use green. I'm still going to use a little bit of red, but now what I'm going to do is add a little yellow. So we just basically have these two colors and there will be an even darker area where we just mix red and green and get it really, really dark. So we have our main color. I'm actually going to use this super dark green, which is mostly red and green, and I'm going to use this color up in the corner. So you can see there's something else there, but because my colors are both wet, it should look a little bit blurry. If it dries, it's not going to look blurry, so I kind of need to work fast. Like if I have a shape like this in here, like a little candy cane, then I want to really quickly come in with my other green around the edge and fill that in so that it's blurry. I don't want it to be a solid shape. And this just looks a little bit painterly. I don't know, I like the effect that this gives. And you just play around with those colors, filling in the different shapes, trying to make sure you keep it wet next to certain areas just so that you can keep it blurry. And we're gonna have to make sure we somehow make this stand out. If you don't like the painterly look in the background, you can also just paint it totally black. You can also use India ink. It works really well. So I'll just show you what that looks like really quick. You can also come back in, add more details, make certain things stand out like the stem with a darker color. Also, when you finish, go ahead and take your tape off and sign it. But that's it. I hope you enjoyed painting this with me and you learned a few techniques for using watercolors. Now what I would do is go outside, take a picture of a flower and paint it, or just go outside and look at a flower and paint it. Have a great day. When you come back inside, I will see you around on YouTube.